Hey, good news, guys. I can I can pull most of my hair back into a man bun now.
Ryan Little.
Japan.
Oh, okay, so maybe the man bun is not good news for everyone, but it's fun for me. Anyhow, Pastor Robbie, we're back for another Sunday video, and today we're looking at the voice of the Father calling out to a young boy and the process through which this young boy learned to recognize the voice of the Father and learned how to respond to the voice of the Father. For this young boy, these two lessons stayed with him for the rest of his life, and they helped guide him through good times and hard times, and they helped him to discern the will of the Father, even when he thought he knew better. Do you know who we're talking about yet? Well, wait a second here, and we'll figure that out in just a moment. Before we get to that point, though, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to this channel. If these types of scripture explorations are something that you look for on YouTube, all you have to do is click the subscribe button, click the bell icon, and then you'll be notified anytime we post a new video here. Now, while you're doing that, hitting all the buttons, let's turn our attention to the words of Scripture. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But Eli said, I did not call you, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls for you again, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In the Old Testament, there are a number of folks who provide us with glimpses of goodness and obedience by which we can learn. Now, if you open the Bible critically, you're going to learn that one of the lessons in Scripture is that many, if not most, of the people recorded in the annals of Jewish and Christian Scriptures were really imperfect people that God used for a short time. Take the book of Judges, for example. Because of the ways in which the Lord uses imperfect people to lead, Israel is constantly returned to this right relationship with God and the glory and honor you would expect of God's people. It's returned to the place where it belongs, with the Father. Samson is a great example of this. To kids, Samson is the strong judge of Israel who, after losing his strength, returns to the Lord, and he's able to defeat the Philistines with his strength. To adults, he's like another irresponsible adult who kind of like dangles his commitment to God and then the resulting gift of his strength as like a form of foreplay with Delilah. Not the greatest leader, but in a moment, Samson defeats the enemies of God. There are rare people in Scripture about whom you read and that person turns out to be a good and faithful person through and through. Samuel, however, is one of those people. In this passage, we see him as a little boy living in the service of the priest Eli. And we'll get to that whole kind of scenario in a second here, but since this is like a one-off in the lectionary, let's just talk about Samuel for a second. Samuel is a significant figure in the story of God's chosen people, and that significance is rooted in the relationship Samuel had with Yahweh. That relationship was marked by one thing, and that was faithfulness. Samuel was faithful to Yahweh no matter what it meant for him personally. Samuel, though he's a child, in this passage, he's going to become the priest to the nation of Israel, and he's going to help them navigate a number of like particularly tumultuous transitions. But it's not just for the leadership Samuel provided that he's remembered. It's honestly, it's for his character that he's remembered. See, when the rest of the nation was in flux, it was always Samuel who was standing steady, questioning what was wrong, and then going to the source of wisdom to process what to do next. When the people pressed for a king, it's Samuel who listened to the Lord. And when the people made it, let's just be honest, an awful choice for that first king, it was Samuel who listened to the Lord and figured out what to do next, right, to anoint the new king. But when it wasn't clear who would be anointed as the next king, again, it's Samuel who is in dialogue with the Father about where that soon-to-be king would be found. Samuel is remembered because of his steadfast character that guided him in obedience throughout his life. Now, that's who Samuel became. In this passage we've read today, we're at the beginning of the journey. And actually, now that I say that out loud, probably not true. We're early in his journey. Actually, there's like something that happens before this that helps us really understand the setting of the passage that we read today a bit more clearly. See, Samuel, as a young boy, was given into the house of Eli by a mother who desired this child so severely. From the first chapter of this book, we learn that the womb of Samuel's mother was closed and that during an annual pilgrimage to the temple, she would provide a double portion for her sacrifice. And she would stay at the altar and weep bitterly for the hope that God would change things around and she would have a child. And in one of those journeys, her prayers, she offered a future child up to the Lord, if only her womb would be opened. Eli, the priest, saw her, and in his wisdom, assumed that she was drunk and then berated her for her drunken spectacle at the temple, right? Like Eli really wasn't known for his wisdom, right? Really, he's kind of known for raising truly evil sons who broke just about every rule within the temple because they were in charge. He's not father of the year material by any stretch. But as this story goes, the Lord hears the prayers of Samuel's mother, and she gives birth to Samuel. She weans him, and when he's 3 years old, she leaves him at the temple with Eli to be raised as a priest. Now, this can be a lot to take in. She's given exactly what she desires, and then she gives that baby up to, maybe one of the worst father figures in Scripture. Maybe not the worst, but definitely in the running, And in that alone, the fact that Samuel doesn't turn into some kind of a maniac is probably a small miracle. But he enters into the house of Eli to be raised in the way of the priest. And one night he hears somebody calling him, and he just assumes that it's Eli. So he gets up, he runs into Eli's room, wakes him up, and asks him what he wants. Well, Eli doesn't want anything, so he sends Samuel back to bed. This happens 3 times before Eli maybe starts to wake up a little bit and pays attention to what's actually happened. It's not Eli speaking to Samuel. It's the Lord speaking to Samuel. Now, in Eli's defense, I think about the kids running upstairs in the middle of the night to tell me something. Like once in a while, Sawyer just needs to kind of I don't know, he's needy sometimes. He wants to be around someone. And so he'll just come upstairs because he needs to tell me something, right? And then when I say, what do you need to tell me, Sawyer? In the middle of the night, he sits there and he thinks for a second and he goes, I love you, Daddy. It's sweet, right? But I'm tired, and it takes me a second sometimes before I'm ready to pay attention to the little guy. So, I understand Eli. And also, I'm not Father of the Year material either sometimes, right? Sometimes I look at Sawyer and I just tell him thanks and send him back to bed, right? But after 3 times, Eli remembers that he's the priest and that God speaks, and he tells the boy Samuel to stop coming to him for answers, right? Maybe the best piece of advice that he gives, right? And then to respond to the voice of God instead. And showing that he's the best student of all times, Samuel does what Eli says. And then for the rest of his life, it seems like he never stops listening for and responding to the voice of the Father. Listening for the voice of the Father, responding to the voice of the Father. I hope for you, just like for me, it sounds like a common thing that we've been focused on for this last year. Samuel is trained by an awful leader who does one thing right. He points Samuel in the direction of the Father. And that interaction transforms Samuel's life. Now, for those of you who watch this video, my prayer for you is that someone has pointed you towards the voice of the Father in the same way at some point in your walk. And if you're thinking to yourself, hey, nobody's ever pointed me in that direction, well, let me be the one who begins to direct you to the voice of the Father. It's not just about reading scripture and praying. The Christian walk is also about listening. And that's a skill that is sorely lacking in the church today. See, the voice of the Father is calling you. Not just Samuel, you. And you want to know what to do when you hear that voice? Respond like Samuel. Speak, for your servant is listening. Hear that voice and allow it to guide you all the days of your life.